Deus Ex is one of the true granddaddies of bar-raising titles from what many consider the golden age of PC gaming. There was a time that game developers made an action game, a stealth game, or an RPG, but never all three.
I'm Warren Spector, designer and director of Deus Ex. I wanted to do something more realistic.
Although Deus Ex plays out on a level-by-level basis, within those areas it was an early subscriber to the sandbox concept, offering the gamer not just a variety of ways to reach a given objective, but also different narrative experiences depending on the decisions made and paths trodden.
But I know the commander and I don't want to see him get hurt. Here's a picture so you don't make a mistake.
The story's engaging and exciting, and your choices have visible ramifications to the world around you, which adds a weight to your decisions not often seen in games.
I'm starving. Do you have anything to eat?
How about some soy food?
Don't matter.
There's no sign of the good versus evil choice system that still plagues gaming to this day, but instead adult decisions are on offer relating to allegiances like the government or the people.
But first we will exterminate the NSF terrorists.
Exterminate?
Or bribes versus altruism, and eventually even those that relate to one's humanity. It was released in the year of the millennium, the year 2000, and what a year that was. Cyberpunk wasn't even considered retro, it was still in, and it was wicked. Real nanotechnology was emerging, and cybernetic implants beyond a pacemaker were considered a technology of tomorrow. Deus Ex was hardly unique in its leather-clad vision of the future, which was a fusion of poverty and punk, and it shared its aesthetic with movies of the time like Dark City, and The Matrix, and Equilibrium. Even the menu screen and interface within the game had a touch of that 2000s charm, with the option to pick a zany color scheme for your cyberpunk HUD. Visually augmented humans, faceless security robots, and an excessive use of the grey color palette gave a depressing feel to the world. Some argue that Deus Ex opted for a quantity over quality approach to building the world when compared to graphically superior peers like, say, Half-Life, most notably in that it wasn't going to win any awards for texturing. But of course, Half-Life was groundbreaking itself, and it still didn't have half as much content packed into its 12-hour campaign. With Deus Ex taking upward of 30 hours on your first run, its campaign length holds up to this day. So you start off as a freshly trained and augmented government agent called J.C. Denton, following the footsteps of your experienced older brother into employment with the United Nations Anti-Terrorist Coalition, referred to as UNATCO.
Heads up, JC. Your brother Paul is on his way to meet you at the dock.
Arriving on the windswept docks of Staten Island Harbor and faced with a terrorist takeover, you're presented with an immediate choice.
Manderley wants you to pick an additional weapon. A sniper rifle, a GEP gun, or a mini crossbow.
And therein begins three very different paths that might define the manner in which you play the entire rest of the game. Do you headshot your enemies from afar and attempt to dodge sentry bots by leaping the outer wall? Do you blow them all to pieces with rockets, step over the bodies and hack your way through the main gate? Or do you sneak, stun and tranquilize your way through the shadows before making use of a flooded storm drain? This choice system was the mantra of Deus Ex, and believe it or not, it was an aspect that the director, Warren Spector, actually had to fight for.
Why are you spending a dime and any time on stealth? My response was, that's the whole point of the game.
And the man he needed to convince was none other than John Romero, iconic game maker famous for his titles Wolfenstein, Doom and Quake just a few years earlier. Romero had broken away from his friends at id Software and founded Ion Storm in 1996 with the dream of creating a more narrative-driven first-person experience. But a number of poor production decisions resulted in his first project, Daikatana, becoming one of gaming's most tragic and memorable misfires.
I'll be there in a sec.
And so, with morale low and his new company on the line, he took the brave step of outsourcing the very role that he had his heart set on. For the position of creative director, he turned to Warren Spector.
John Romero called me up, said, make the game of your dreams.
The one-time board game creator and Dungeons & Dragons aficionado, who'd most notably achieved success on the techno-wizard role-playing game Ultima 6, and as a producer for the action-adventure game System Shock. Spector then went on to pioneer the choice versus consequence philosophy that of course is so common in games today, and with that, Romero knew the future of storytelling in video games was in safe hands. To facilitate all the choices, naturally Denton gets into a lot of conversations, which in turn brings us to one of the areas that the game famously faltered.
We were developing a new technology. You might have heard about a sword.
The accents. Yikes. Deus Ex escaped the age of the meme, but god does it get its fair share of ribbing online for some of the voice work.
Has the appropriate authority for the security login to open the sub-bay doors.
But considering game standards of the time had led to this.
That's right. This is the ultimate life form.
And this.
People of the AMS, I am Goldman.
Being burped onto consoles within just the past 4 years, you can see why Warren Spector was so desperate to raise the industry's game. And so a few funky accents here and there are pretty forgivable when the core voice work, including the protagonist, are smooth sailing.
Like this? That's better.
At the time Romero approached him, Spector had been taking note of his wife's fascination with the X-Files, which was what inspired him to wrap the core story of a cyberpunk cop in a dystopian future with recognizable conspiracy theories like Area 51, AI, and the Illuminati. These connections were what made the Tomorrow's World feel closer to home. It did take itself somewhat seriously by exploring themes like the dangers of giving AI constructs too much power in society, or by exploring what defines terrorism.
Players explore what terrorism is all about. It's a total coincidence. If you look at the skyline in the game, the World Trade Center isn't there. In a game about terrorism, that's a little scary.
And in doing so, it played its part in the cyberpunk movement around the millennium that propagated real-world fears like the millennium bug. We might laugh at Neo's leather trench coat now, but at the time this stuff was edgy. And another forward-thinking aspect was how the game recalibrated according to your choices beyond those just in conversations. For example, at one stage, I boarded this plane hunting for a terrorist leader. I'd saved the game as I was just about to shut it down and go to bed. And my abusive teammate turned up and told me to take him down. I fancy testing out a new weapon I'd found, and she seemed as good a target as any, and so I gunned her down like the maverick cop I was. And to my amazement, from that point on, the game turned upside down.
Jesus, JC, that was Agent Navarre. I'll protect you this time. You better have a good explanation.
Enemies were allies, and old friendlies were now trying to kill me, complete with new conversation options to boot.
I guess Paul must have convinced you. All right, we're alone. If you have proof of a conspiracy, let's hear it.
Combined with the various ways to access the different states that the game presents depending on your choices, the replayability was yet another notch on an already tall bedpost. So the first level has you progress through the park where a terrorist group has taken over the plaza around the recently decapitated Statue of Liberty. Straight off the bat, a much-loved idol shown to have a bleak future at the hands of terrorists sets the tone. After neutralizing the threat and having your first revealing conversation with a terrorist leader, you'll find yourself navigating the whisper-filled corridors of your headquarters, UNAPCO. Incoming messages, words spoken from the guards, and reactions to things you do make the building feel like a working base.
How unprofessional.
This concept of navigating an area outside of combat for the sole purpose of story progression wasn't unique to Deus Ex, but it was a concept very much in its infancy, and Spector's team leveraged it well. You were expected to explore and find your office, read your emails, read other people's emails, visit the armory, touch base with your tech advisor, debrief with your boss.
Stay out of the ladies' restroom.
These goals weren't presented in a linear fashion as a series of objectives, but rather you were expected to navigate your way around a genuinely intriguing base, and in doing so you'd happen upon them.
Way to go, sir.
Home bases have been a staple of gaming for quite some time now, but at the time Deus Ex was innovating. From there, Denton's travels would see him visit a considerable mix of locations, from sewers and catacombs, to container ships and family homes, to high-rises and offices, to rain-swept streets and docks, to aeroplanes and secret laboratories. All the while, an engrossing backing track really brought the whole experience home. Composed by Alexander Brandon, Dan Gardopi, and Michiel Vandenbo, it was a masterpiece worthy of as much praise as the game, and it has been critically acclaimed as such. A handful of the tracks were products of the late 90s era, like this track that sounds like it's straight out of Final Fantasy VII, which of course was actually released a mere 3 years earlier. But these fillers pale in comparison to some of the iconic beats and melodies matched to various levels. I hear this one, and in my mind, I get pulled back to the dusty roads of New York City in an instant. been about 20 years since I first played the game, and I can close my eyes and still call up the visuals. And this, the calm yet intimidating corporate corridors of the UNATCO headquarters. And now it's the electric streets of Hong Kong. This was the tune that was playing in the background as you hit the ground running in Asia. I mean, listen to this thing. If you're watching this video because you're a Deus Ex fan, then we both know that you don't need convincing.
Stay out of business.
But if you're yet to experience the game, then know this: however much the graphics might have dated, the soundtrack has not. It's exceptional and more modular than any of its contemporaries, with conversation, action, and even death variants made for almost every song of every area to ensure that your personal soundtrack never lets up no matter what happens. Now, when it comes to the classic RPG element, Deus Ex modernized what had previously been an on-screen variant of Dungeons & Dragons. Denton's abilities are split between his skills and his augmentations. Firstly, skills are upgradable through points earned for exploration, an achievement, and will affect hacking, medicine use, ability to handle weapons in different categories, and so on. And they help play their part in enhancing your ability to pursue stealth or overt routes during play. Lockpicking and electronics would routinely grant you additional routes, whereas swimming, even at its higher levels, never really granted you access to an area that couldn't be reached with some careful maneuvering and good timing. Rifles and heavy weapons could entirely remove a threat from a distance before giving it a chance to respond, and so improving accuracy and damage in those areas made sense. But pistols would require you to get so close to the enemy that it made much less of a difference, especially with the freaking tranquilizer crossbow that you want to be your best friend, but it had a habit of missing even at master level. And the melee was an even bigger waste of time because later game weapons were so powerful they practically one-shot most of your foes anyway. So if you are yet to play the game, just bear the above in mind. Then we have the augmentations, which is sort of the game's namesake.
You'll soon have access to upgrades from standard augmentation canisters.
5 parts of Denton's body, so legs, torso, arms, head, and eyes, can be augmented just once from a choice of 2 abilities. And it can't be undone either, so when you find a canister and make your choice, you're in it for the long haul. There isn't a wrong decision, but what you choose does have the potential to block off some paths for the entire rest of your playthrough. For instance, pumped up strength can dish out one-hit melee kills, but lifting strength allows you to clear boxes from crawl spaces, or build a makeshift route over a wall. You want to be able to leap tall walls and fall from great heights? Or have silent footsteps that allow for sprinting stealth kills. Various power-ups would be on offer as well, with mods like lasers and scopes available for the firearms, and equipment can be found such as hazmat suits, optic camo, and underwater rebreathers, which are effectively one-use items that can be used to take on challenges that would otherwise be reserved for specific augmentations. Of course, these took up space in your inventory, along with one-shot weapons like the rocket launcher or this funny little one-shot pocket rocket. And so inventory management naturally topped off the list of classic RPG elements in the game. Just 3 years later, it received a sequel called Invisible War, which was a dumbed-down version of its parent that catered more to the masses and less to the purist RPG crowd. The game was set 20 years in the future, moving the setting from cyberpunk Tomorrow's World all the way to fantasy silliness. Ammunition had been combined into a single futuristic clip loadable into all weapons. Well, actually a unique and pretty fun concept. The arcadey feel unfortunately led to you never once feeling like you had to savor your precious weapons for unseen challenges. And so too, the skills were a thing of the past, meaning the thrill of scouring over potential upgrades arrived at far fewer points in the game through only the augmentation canisters. Weapon mods were badly balanced and the story was far less engaging, but despite all of this, it was still a halfway decent game, and that shouldn't be a surprise considering its bloodline.
You are the 3rd Denton prototype, a clone of JC.
But against its predecessor, it was a watered-down tribute at best, with largely all decisions and routes bringing you to the same ending with the same choices. It actually received excellent review scores on major websites, but history has shown these to be exaggerated as the second game has aged far worse and maintains a tepid fan base at best. A full 8 years after that, which is more than a generation in console terms, Deus Ex Human Revolution arrived on the scene. This outing presented sublime graphics for its time, and another skin-tingling soundtrack and conspiracy-driven storyline. The game is in fact a prequel to Deus Ex, and the protagonist is the head of security for the corporation Sarif Industries, who are responsible for the augmentations seen throughout the series. In the original game, some of your teammates would grumble that they were running outdated mechanical implants that couldn't be replaced, which was a point of tension in the game because of course JC Denton was running cutting-edge cybernetics.
What's it like to stand around revving your actuators while the more advanced units complete the mission?
But in Human Revolution, Adam Jensen is revealed to be the OG cyborg, the proverbial beta tester for those emerging mechanical upgrades, and as a result possesses much more physical and less refined abilities than JC Denton. Melee attacks became a far stronger feature of the game, leading to a stealthy player spending much time moving crouched behind walls or sneaking behind enemies' fields of view. It wasn't original, but with all the competition available in that era of gaming, little was.
The closer the better, I think. That way I'll be sure they stay down.
The original game actually gets some heat for its mediocre action sequences, but in part that's because it was geared towards steering you away from traditional run-and-gun methods.
If they compared us to pure shooters, pure stealth games, and pure role-playing games, we would be in a world of trouble.
Of course, it had a lot less to prove thanks to the pioneering found in other areas. But Human Revolution didn't get that free pass because it had contemporaries on the shelves like Batman Arkham City and Uncharted 3. And so a great emphasis was put on the stealth mechanics, which was all the rage at the time. The points distribution would actually push you a little too firmly down the stealth route, with lethal takedowns and moves that spawned hurricanes and blades and bullets actually being less effective to your endgame as you got less points for doing it. And it would attract guards. Like, I really dig that they were trying to encourage the humanitarian approach, but it did leave me wondering who exactly the noisy murder moves were aimed at.
You're fucking weird.
The boss battles were famously outsourced and ludicrously hard, mainly because they negated the use of stealth, which is what virtually every player had been funneled down. Altogether, cutting-edge graphics, the techno interface, the compelling story, and the somber voice acting made Human Revolution a very worthy tribute.
Glad to hear it.
Just not quite one stamped in the annals of time like the original. Considering it goes on Steam for about £5 or $8 US, it's a great way to either learn about gaming history or relive a nostalgic dream that's probably been nagging you for 2 decades. Jesus, I'm old. It might not have the same impact now, but that's not to say it's no longer impactful. Few games today take you on such a rich journey of discovery that leaves haunting theme tunes, conspiracy-driven excitement, and thoughts of groundbreaking social-economic downfall rattling around in your head. It runs smoothly on virtually any computer built in the last 10 years, there's a bunch of mods available, and while you may not agree with it, it is still quoted as being one of the best video games of all time for a reason. I am desperate to get to 1,000 subs so YouTube will actually start paying me, so if you could find it in yourself to hit that like button or maybe even subscribe, I would be so grateful. Thank you so much, take care of yourself, peace out, and hopefully see you next time.